We are grateful that SEIU is allowing us to be in their space. You all know it's personal for me and for us. My daddy was SEIU 1199 back in New York, and my mom was in the room. Hillary Lawrence is in the building right there. So she got her bow and everything. She's been ready for that. There you go. Right there. I wore my purple to be ready for today. I'm an alpha still. Let's relax, everybody. But with that, let us make sure protocol is established. Let us introduce the president of 1199 SEIU, President George Gresham, who is going to introduce the president of SEIU, Mary Kay Henry. President Gresham.
Thank you, Michael, for convening this. It's a great moment. It's a great time for us to both reflect and look forward. I'm honored to meet your mother. I've heard so many things about her, and between her and your father, you can tell that you were raised right. Yes. So, it's now my pleasure to introduce my president. My president, a labor leader that was born for this time, person that loves to bring people out of the darkness into the light. That's what our job is. Our job is to make sure that the true meaning of this country is enjoyed by everyone. And that can't happen until the people that are working in the shadows, not making a good living, not getting the dignity and respect that they deserve, until we can change that. And I can tell you that this has been her mission from the time that she took over leadership of SEIU. It is my pleasure to present our and my president, Mary Kay Henry.
Thank you so much for that generous introduction. And I'm here to welcome you to the house that the service employees, workers built. Janitors, security officers, nursing home workers, home care workers, overwhelmingly Black, brown, and immigrant workers from all over the world who have been written out of our nation's labor laws, social security, employment protections because of gender and race. And this union's fight, as George said, has been to write workers back in and to link the fights for racial and economic justice. Because this room knows our shared history is that we are not going to win economic justice for all working people in this country until we win racial justice in this country. And that's what the march 60 years ago was, a beacon of hope for our members, and is why we're so proud to be the space that 1199 SEIU and the Atlas Strategy Group and KAIROS Center have this incredible evening planned for us. And I just want to recognize that we have two non-union wheelchair attendants with us tonight who have come to the march from Atlanta. They are fighting to get their union organized, and if they would stand. Are you in the room?
Yes.
Yeah, great. And the card that I wrote your name is in my purse out there, so can you say your names again?
My name is Carla Angeles.
Carla Angeles and Darlene Frazier, who earn minimum wage at Atlanta's airport for contracted out work with no paid time off, no health care coverage, and no guaranteed schedules or hours. Yeah, as they move elders and people with disabilities from the curb to the cabin. And we so honor your work, and we're in the fight for your good jobs and freedom today, right here. And I just want to close by honoring the incredible leadership of George Gresham, the president of 1199 SEIU, and his partner, Millie Silva, the secretary-treasurer of 1199 SEIU. They're fighting for healthcare workers all along the East Coast and across the nation, and to insist on quality, affordable healthcare for every human being that lives in the United States of America. Thank you so much for the work that you all do, and we're happy to have you.
So at this time, I'm going to turn the microphone over to moderate the majority of the program, a woman who doesn't need any intro because she has been a specialist when it comes to communications in multiple aspects. There's very few people who can say that they were a comms director for a president and a speaker, including making sure that Trump got indicted. So she kind of knows what she's doing right there. So since we're in this house, and thank you to SEIU again for letting us be in this house, let me turn the mic over right now to the one and only Ashley Etienne to get us going. Put your hands together.
Thank you, Michael Blake, my former White House colleague. I don't know if we were in the White House at the same time, but we'll take credit. We're OG Obama folks. But it's really impressive to see young Blake grow up to be such a powerful man to bring us all together in this room. But before we get into the substance, we've got a lot of wonderful speakers full of great knowledge, and they want to impart on us today as we move forward. But before we do that, T-Ray, I would love for you to open up with the National Negro Anthem, please.
Yeah.
Amen to that. Can you guys hear me? Great. I was saying amen and amen to that. We should have opened up every day in the White House with that song. Because we needed it, especially the 4 years that Trump and I worked for Pelosi. But it's an appropriate place for us to start, obviously, with all things. But I want to call up our first speaker. First, we're going to bring up Bishop Vashti McKenzie. Welcome her on stage. I was very close to saying Vashti Murphy. Hey, Sora, how are you? Yes. Okay, so let's get started. I think it's, do you mind? So I think it's appropriate that we start with you because the movement was birthed out of the church. Our faith fueled it and faith leaders led it. So I'd love to get your thoughts on where do you think the church is today in America?
The church, specifically the African American church, provided leadership as well as the foot soldiers in the civil rights movement. And it continues today, perhaps in a different way, not as much as it did back in the late 1950s and 60s, but it still provides leadership and it still provides the foot soldiers.
And I should say, Michael Blake didn't give me enough time to fully introduce every speaker, so forgive me, we don't have a lot of time, so I'm gonna run through, but I will say, you're an author, the president, general secretary, of the National Council of Churches, so I will say that, forgive me for not adding that. Okay, so Dr. King talked about the beloved community. I'd love to get your thoughts as the ideal, as sort of the North Star, what we should try to achieve as a nation. I'd love to get your thoughts on your interpretation of what you think the beloved community is and what do you think is the greatest barrier to us achieving that as a nation.
When we talk about the beloved community, I believe it's for what I do, for where I am at the National Council of Churches, representing 30.5 million people, 100,000 congregations in 37 denominations. And those denominations run from historically African American, mainline Protestant, and Orthodox denomination to peace group denominations. And so what happens in the faith community, we strive to be collaborators in building and living out the beloved community. Many times we focus on the scripture in the Gospel of John where it says that we all might be one. But I'd like to take that a little bit further to 1 Corinthians 12, where we are one body, but we have many parts. And so one ideation of the beloved community then is that the head can't say to the neck, I don't need you. The arm cannot say to the hand, I don't need you. The knee to the foot, I don't need you. In order for the beloved community to be alive and to work, then all of us are going to have to work together. And so in order to move forward, hands and feet have to be coordinated and make a decision that we're going to move forward, or we're going to pivot and step to the side. That means the beloved community in this framework means that we don't disrespect the various parts of the body, especially if we don't understand how that part functions. It means then that I value the parts of the body. I don't disrespect the parts of the body because I need the part of the body. I may not like what the gut does, but I can't live without the gut. And so we value each part, we respect each member, but we still are one body with many parts. What happens often in our today's culture is that we have a hard time with other, and we have a hard time with different. Being a part of the beloved community doesn't mean that we clone each other. I don't have to be just like you, you don't have to be just like me. So when we learn how to respect our differences and respect our uniqueness, then we were able to reach the ideal that the scripture talks about, that Dr. King reached for, that I can respect your uniqueness. Your uniqueness doesn't negate my uniqueness, and my uniqueness doesn't negate your uniqueness. I don't have to put you down or try to destroy you to enhance my uniqueness. My uniqueness is what it is. I don't have to hate you because of your gifting. I respect your gifting, and you don't have to hate me for mine. I don't have to make you a second-class citizen in order for me to be a citizen. but I respect your uniqueness, your gifting, rather than to be afraid of your difference.
So
One body, many parts.
to get to one body, am I hearing you say you think respect is fundamental? Seeing each other is fundamental? What do you think is fundamental to getting to the one body?
It's called being created in the image of God. You're a human. I don't care who you are. We are all created in the image of God. We are siblings. We're part of the same human family. And what has happened in our culture is that in order for us to have a second-class citizenship, enslavement, human trafficking, all kinds of hate and violence, is that we have to make someone less human. And if you're less human, then I'm gonna have to respect your humanity.
Listen, how do I follow that with a question? It's too heavy, it's too heavy. Hey, by the way, can I just tell you, I think you're a phenomenal preacher. I've followed you my entire life, I think you're phenomenal. Another question I have for you though is, it seems to me that religion is being weaponized in a lot of ways against all those parts, right? To your point, we're one body with many parts, many of those parts. I'd love to get your thoughts on the implications of that, not just on the body of the church, but on the body of a nation.
Well, privilege and white nationalism, Christian nationalism, which is what you call the weaponization of faith, the extremism of faith. And sometimes I wake up in the morning and I read and I listen. I'm not quite sure which Jesus they talk about. They ain't talking about mine. Jesus fed the poor. He took care of the lost and the lonely. He went into the caves to address a man who was out of his mind. And when the man was healed, then the community was afraid. Wasn't afraid of him while he was out of his mind, but when he got his life straight, he became afraid of him. And so I'm not quite sure which kind of Jesus they're talking about. It's not the one that I worship. It's not the one that I believe in. Jesus, in all respect, as Jane Cone has written, is the God of the oppressed, is on the side of the least and the marginalized. And so this kind of extremism, privilege, and nationalism has, let's say, aborted the carnal, let's say, the focused truth of the scripture. And we all know in this room, scripture has been misused and misappropriated for selfish needs. And so as it was then, so it is now. And the called out ones have to preach the truth of the gospel, even in the face of those who would distort it.
Amen to that. Can I ask a favor of you? We were supposed to do this at the top, but we didn't do this at the top. Do you mind?
Do what now?
We were supposed to do this at the top, we didn't do this at the top. Do you mind opening us up with prayer?
Oh, sure.
Do you mind?
Come on.
Should we stand or no?
Well, I will stand.
I'll stand.
And in our COVID environment, we have a hard time joining hands, but can we just elbow somebody? There's contact somewhere, elbow somebody. It's been a busy day all around, and it's gonna be even busier tomorrow. So can we just take a deep breath? Can we just inhale and exhale? Can you inhale and exhale again? Then inhale one more time. And this time, when you exhale, let go every argument you've been in today. Inhale one more time, please. And let go every kind of remark that has come in your direction. Inhale, and then let go some unforgiveness. All the way, all the way. Inhale one more time. And let go at least one worry. At least one. Father, in the name of Jesus, we invite your presence and invoke your presence into this place. Open our minds that we're able to receive your thoughts and hear your voice in this space. Open our hearts that we may hear and receive you. We thank you for your presence and your power. Even in the midst of those who try to destroy us, you stand up in us. Even when the rug is pulled out from underneath of us, we hold on to your word that you say you have plans for us. Plans not to harm, but to prosper us and to give us a hope, even in hopeless times. Thank you for the men and women who put their lives on the line 60 years ago. Thank you for the 250,000 people who showed up on the right day and the right time for the right purposes. Thank you, God, for calling this generation to build upon the foundation that has been left by previous generations, that we may bring to conclusion the fight of our grandparents and our ancestors and hold the country accountable for what they have done, and then help us to move forward to a better and brighter future. Thank you for calling us to be the change agents. Now empower us to get the change done. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Madam. Can we have a round of applause for Bishop? Next, we're gonna ask Dr. Clarence Jones to come up to the stage, as well as Mark Morial, President of the National Urban League. Can we give a round of applause for him?
Oh, boy. See, Mark knows I knew his dad. New Orleans, I mean, I love where I live in New Orleans. Yes. You don't love New Orleans, then you don't love the city. Anyway, brother, I take a look at you. Some little bit of history, you know what I'm saying?
Thank you.
You're not as beautiful as I am, but you're beautiful.
That's a little thing we got.
Anyway, come over here. Yeah, oh yeah, come on. I'm fine.
Here you go, sir.
Yes.
Thank you for joining us, both of you.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. This is an incredible, important moment, a big moment. I'd love to hear from, hopefully I'm on, yes, perfect. I'd love to hear from both of you about how you define this moment in history, looking back and looking forward. Would you like to start first, Mr. Jones?
Well, it is an extraordinary moment for me, because when I sat here, extraordinary moment for me because Martin and Washington were out in the field in August 25th, 1963. Now, maybe some of you know this, and maybe some of you don't. You know, there was some faithful Randolphs and the other people, there's some question of this. You know, it says the March on Washington for jobs and freedom. You know, well, there was some initial discussion as to whether or not this should be the March on Washington for freedom first. Now, those of you who may have read a certain video, if you have been in the room and heard a husband, bad brother, being on the phone, 1199. The March on Washington, I just want to make one thing very clear that you will not know unless somebody like me tells you. Unless you know. That march, the foundation of what took place were the unions and the churches. Okay? And I wanna give credit where I think is not sufficiently credit to our Archbishop Joseph O'Boyle of the Catholic Archdiocese in Washington, D.C. Okay, a lot of people forget. 2 weeks before the march, Archbishop O'Boyle, he had in all of the churches in the D.C. Area, he was giving out leaflets. He had priests and nuns, and so if there ever was a time when we need to have a coming together, of our religions, it's time. And of course, District 65, those retail stores, Cleveland Robinson, David Livingston, people, Rob Dawson, United Pancasper, United Electrical, and the UAW. Patrick Gaspard. I was talking to Patrick Gaspard, and I said, Patrick, the one thing I like about you is that every time we have a conversation, you always go back to 1199. Thing I love. So, in the interest of not wasting all of that time, I want this generation to have no misconception. That March on Washington was labor-based. Labor-based. If you look at the films, you see who do you see monitoring and managing the crowds? Who do you see? They're union workers. Many of them are probably wearing union caps. Who do you think are managing the crowds? They're all union workers, various unions. All right, so.
I got more questions for you, don't worry.
First of all, I just want to say how important, how humbled, how special it is for me to share this couch with this legend. This man is there. Played a role as an advisor and a wordsmith, helping to draft the famous words that Dr. King enunciated that day. It gives us a connection to that moment in time, that iconic point in American history, which is so special to this very moment. I want to acknowledge what Clarence Jones just said. The unions, the churches, and the civil rights community came together. The March on Washington was a collective effort. It defied the odds. A few things you should also know. The United States government, notwithstanding the fact that President Kennedy was a supporter of the March at least publicly, assembled thousands and thousands of troops and police officers on the outskirts of Washington, D.C., for fear that if 250,000 Black people came to D.C., there would be a riot. The stereotypes about large gatherings of Black people were ever present in March. Now, what do we say today, 60 years later? I am proud and humbled that I was at the 20th anniversary march. I was a law student, helping to organize Black law students' participation. Donna Brazil was the student coordinator of the 20th anniversary march. They had an opportunity to be at the 40th in 03 and the 50th in 2013, now the 60th. But there's something different today. I'm feeling a sense of indignance about the fact that if you ask me how far have we come, and I reflect on 1,000 proposals at the state legislative level to suppress the vote. 1,000+ proposals to ban books and the teachings of African American history. A Supreme Court hell-bent on reversing the civil rights precedents of the last 50 years. How can I feel anything but indignant? But then I reflect on 1963 and what they had and what they didn't have.
That's right.
They didn't come here and stay at the Hilton or Waldorf
Come on,
or
man.
Sheraton or Holiday Inn. They didn't eat at the Palm or Ruth's Chris Steakhouse or Del Frisco's. They didn't meet at 1199 or NEA. They came by bus, they came by train, and if they were from the South, they rode the back of the train and the back of the bus to be able to get here. And what that teaches me is, at this moment, while I'm indignant, I'm not tired. And we cannot be tired. We have to be resolute that the challenges they face, just the idea, and you know this, Clarence, when they met with President Kennedy in May or June of '63, and told him they were gonna have the march, he spent the first part of that meeting trying to talk him out of it.
Exactly. Absolutely.
And A. Philip Randolph said, Mr. President, we hear you, but we're coming. It caused Kennedy to pivot. Kennedy pivoted, and weeks later, sent up to Congress what became the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and the march then turned into a march to pass the legislation and to raise awareness of the legislation. Why do I say we have got to understand the strategy behind the '63 march, the mobilization, the coalition bill, the energy and effort and the adversity to bring 250,000 people to Washington, D.C. This march, we have to see it as a continuation. We have to see it as an elevation. We are marching at a time when the former commander-in-chief of the United States has been indicted and charged with staging a coup.
That's right.
The very essence of democracy is at play. This is the backdrop. So 63 was important. We thought 83 was important. We thought 2003 was important. And we thought 2013 was important. 2023 is real important.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
To muster up the energy that we need. Final thing I'll say is a personal reflection. One part of the narrative of the march that doesn't get told is that in addition to the March on Washington, there was simultaneous, weeks later, local marches to mirror the 1963 march.
Wow.
My father, my late father, who was president of the NAACP branch at the time, was one of the organizers of the '63 march. My mother wrote a book about 8-10 years ago, and as she was writing the book, we were talking about the march in '63, and I said, Mom, remind me why. I think I would have been 5 at the time. We always went to marches and rallies. Why didn't we go? And why didn't you go? She said, because they told us no women and children should come. For fear that the Ku Klux Klan or the police were going to attack the marchers, and the circumstances would be very, very dangerous. See, in those days, and I'll just tell you this last thing, we were at one of these marches, and the irrepressible Dick Gregory was there.
Yes, sir.
Dick always had wisdom with a twist. And I said, Dick, come over here and talk to these young folks. I said, Dick, tell us what's different about now and marches in the 1960s. He said, y'all got a permit? Y'all got a stage? Y'all got police presence on your side? He said, y'all look like y'all ain't had commitment compared to what we were confronted with. He said, every time we marched, we didn't know if we were going to be safe. And the seminal, of course, is John Lewis in Selma, which was indicative of the danger that marches took on. So, you know, we're here. I just want us all to, in the moment, recognize that the agenda, the disparities, the challenges we face are still ever present, and we must continue to work.
I just want to make sure that our creative, our union brothers and sisters, wherever. The question is always, calling for a march is like calling for a party. You're not sure that anyone could come. So what the union people did was that they called, they arranged for people in different localities, different states. For example, we had spotters standing at public telephones on the Ohio Turnpike, the Pennsylvania Turnpike, the New Jersey Turnpike, all the major roads coming into Washington, okay? And they would call from a payphone and said, I'm calling from so-and-so from the Ohio Turnpike, and we just saw a bus stop so-and-so. And somebody else would be called, I'm calling from the Pennsylvania Turnpike, the bus stop so-and-so, I'm calling from the New Jersey Turnpike. It was that call, those calls, within that 24-hour period before the march, gave the organizers sense that they had thrown a party, and indeed, people were going to come. One final thing I'm going to say, Lord have mercy, if we had cell phones, we had cell phones and laptops, 5 million people would have showed up. 5 million people. I say that without fear.
I would ask you why 5 million don't show up now that we have phones, but I'll hold that for another conversation. Thank you both, this was incredible.
Thank you, Ashley.
Yes.
And I just want to shout out Michael Blake, certainly your question. Thank you.
That was incredible.
Good brother, thank you so much. I'm okay. Yeah, okay. What happens, you know? 92, just a few ways, a couple of months from 93, but still kicking.
Thanks, sir. Next, we'd like to bring the Honorable Tom Perez to address us. Do you mind, sir? Round of applause for Tom Perez. And Mr. here, former mayor, both now the honorables working in the White House. Thank you, sir. Wonderful to see you both. Thank you for being here. So that was incredible stage setting. So we talked.
Friends don't let friends.
Hard to follow.
Yeah, exactly. Friends don't let friends follow. Clarence Jones and Mark Morreale.
I was gonna ask Clarence Jones, I ran out of time, I was just gonna ask him about how that speech came together. Can you imagine the amount of pressure in writing such a speech? I mean, it's stood the test of time. I was just sinking, and my stomach was sinking, you know, thinking about it, that amount of pressure. But let's move forward if you don't mind. So we've talked about sort of the beginnings, fuel, the church, the involvement of the church, stage setting about the actual march, all the players that were involved in it. Mark Morreale talked about the inside-outside game. Both of you now are inside. Mr. Perez, you're serving Tom, you're out of respect. So I've known you in so many capacities. Tom, you're serving as special senior advisor, deputy, assistant to the president, and director of intergovernmental affairs. former mayor, you're now serving as
Go for it, go for it.
I'm trying my best, assistant to the president and director of the Office of Engagement. And senior advisor, all right. All three, you gotta have all three titles, they matter when you're in the White House. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the inside game, and where we are with that. I was looking at the program from 60 years ago, and I was looking at the list of demands. And when you look at the list of demands, they really haven't changed much, right? Decent housing, the right to vote, minimum wage, a livable wage. I mean, many of the issues that we're still fighting for, many of the issues that the president has taken on and has prioritized and led on. I'd love to hear from your perspective, what is the message from the administration to this room, to everyone outside, to those that will be marching, about what the president has done on the issues that really matter most to them, the issues that are still on this list that we're still fighting for.
That we've come a long way, but we have a long way to go. And I was looking at the same demands. And the one I started focusing on was authority for the Attorney General to institute injunctive suits when any constitutional right is violated. You know, in 1965, we passed the Voting Rights Act. And that Voting Rights Act proved to be a real bellwether, especially Section 5. My worst day in the Obama administration, when I had the privilege of leading the Civil Rights Division, was June of 2013, when the court basically neutered the Voting Rights Act in the Shelby County case. And so I think about that because we see the unfinished business. But then I think now of this most recent term, where using Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, we should be drawing 2 districts in Alabama where voters have the black voters have the ability to elect a candidate of their choice. We should be doing the same thing in Louisiana, where Mayor Morial served with great distinction. We should be doing the same thing in a number of other states. And so what I'm proud about with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris is they understand history. They understand that this is a marathon relay. The baton is in their hands. And, you know, when you look at this, I don't think there's been a more pro-union president, perhaps in the history of our country, than Joe Biden. And as we celebrate this moment, we should remember that. Thank you for clapping, because that deserves great applause. And that is very real from Joe Biden. You know, he came up through, he was a criminal defense lawyer. You know, he saw in Delaware what was happening to black folks. And that is a huge part of his consciousness. And today he sees that it's not simply black folks who are encountering challenges, but it's people across the spectrum. And I think his faith, and I feel very humbled to be following so many of us folks, but his faith really informs his leadership. And I would describe him in a nutshell as a Matthew 25 Catholic. You know, if you are hungry, I will feed you. If you are unhoused, I will provide you housing. If you're an immigrant among us, we will welcome you. That is a president who really does live his faith. And he would be the first to tell you that we got a lot more work to do. But boy, thank God he's there. Thank God Kamala Harris is there. Thank God Steve Benjamin's there.
I'm not as bold as Tom. I'm not going to start quoting scripture with a bishop in the room. I know, and it's been a real pleasure working with former Secretary Perez in this role over the last few months. And I agree. The president, he says in much more flowery terms, but it is the fact that we're not where we want to be, but we're not where we used to be. But being very cognizant of the fact that there are a whole lot of people working very hard right now to take us back to where we used to be. And that requires the aggressive, intentional leadership of a president, vice president, a team of people around them to make sure that that does not happen. And we've been working aggressively to pass policy. Every single day when Congress won't play ball, when they won't follow Chairman Horsford's leadership when they should, it's our job to make sure that we use the power of the pen, we use the power of the executive order, we use everything we have, we use the bully pulpit to push for the changes that need to happen. And obviously, I grew up in a union household. It's important for us to lean in hard and do what the president says every day. We've been building the economy, what, from the bottom up and what? And go out. But realizing that doesn't just happen, that you can't rely on trickle down economics to make things happen. That you have to use the power of policy making to try and intentionally change literally the course of the next half of the 21st century. And we've been doing that. We can talk about Bidenomics, we can talk about job creation, we can talk about historic low unemployment among African Americans, about the way in which we're literally trying to change the trajectory of the American economy to make sure everyone can participate. But there's a lot of work to do, and we have, as Tom just referenced, we have significant forces who come out from the darkness and will utter and say and do things thought untenable just 10, 12, 16 years ago, and not shy about it. So we have to counter that with the same level of aggression, with integrity, and hope and pray that the better angels of America show up on election day to make sure that we're able to hold the line.
So let's talk about election day. I think what I will call somewhat a provocative question. I was in the building and I was on Capitol Hill when George Floyd died and ran point on.
George Floyd was murdered.
Excuse me, absolutely right. And was working on the Hill and helped draft that bill, was trying to get that bill passed, got it done in 30 days. Then went back to the White House. The vice president took on the issue, got the issue of voting rights, she took on that issue too. I'm just really curious how you guys, since we get back to the inside outside, what is the strategy on those two particular issues, especially understanding how much they animate, how much they mean for our lives, livelihoods, but also how much they animate the community. I'm just really curious, what is the strategy there? What's the way forward? Because, I think, we may have a reckoning on election day and a reminder that we've not made progress on those two big issues that, drove people to the polls last cycle.
You want to join us up here, Mr. Chairman? Take a seat.
He's next. I got some questions.
And I'll yield to the real lawyer. I've been pretending to be a lawyer for 30 years, so I'll yield the time on this. I'll say that we have made progress under the executive order on the things that the president can control. Because of Republicans in Congress, we've not been able to do all we want on the George Floyd bill, and certainly, as Tom also illuminated, to protect very basic voting rights that people marched, pride, and died for. We're fighting battles we ought not fight. So again, progress made through executive order, but not the legislative action that we need to take. And I will say this: I think the president has been very aggressive and progressive, but he's also been pragmatic. And every step we can take, he's been able to take using, again, the power of the bully pulpit. I mean, things obviously, to some of us, very important, some maybe not as important on forgiveness of student loans, for example. We're not able to do all that the president has wanted to do, but able to forgive hundreds of billions of dollars of student loans and changing people's lives, every single day, with each loan forgiven. We might not get 100% of it done, but we're going to take every step we can and be aggressive in doing so. When the SCOTUS came for affirmative action, we were ready on day one with the diversity standard, partner with so many people in this room in fashioning something that would ensure diversity on university campuses and continue to pump record amounts of money into HBCUs, over $7 billion so far. We're going to keep pushing, realizing that the enemy has its backup, is well funded by a relatively small group of people, and led by now an indicted former president leading the way. we just have to keep pushing.
And, I had the privilege of leading the Civil Rights Division under President Obama, and I worked there for about a dozen years when I had all my service. And the thing I would remind us of in the policing context is that there are remarkable tools that exist right now. I had the privilege, my first police misconduct case I prosecuted as a career civil servant was an LAPD officer pre-Rodney King. I had hair back then, that's how long ago it was. And the authority that the Justice Department has under the pattern and practice laws has been a transformational authority. We used it in LAPD, post-Rodney King. We used it in New Orleans. We used it in Seattle. We used it in Portland. We've used it in Detroit. We've used it elsewhere. So we need to pass the George Floyd bill, but we are not powerless without it. And we can't wait, notwithstanding the chairman's best efforts. He would be one of the first to say that we've got to continue to have an aggressive executive branch. I'll give you just one data point. During the 8 years of the Bush administration, you know how many cases they did under the pattern and practice authority of the Justice Department? Under those 8 years, you need one thumb to count the number of cases they did. And in the 8 years of President Obama, and now here, we did, just in the 4 years I was there, we ended up doing something like 36 cases. So elections matter. Mark Thompson and I have had this conversation on his podcast many times. And so it's so important, not only at a federal level, but at a state and local level. My good friend Keith Ellison, thank God for Keith, the work he did on George Floyd. I tell him, the Lord has a plan for everyone. I learned that from my mother. And God put him in that AG seat when he put him in that AG seat so that Keith would be there at the right moment. I don't know if Keith was here. I thought he might be here tonight. But I'm telling you, that is really, really important. And I think it's so important not to, I am frustrated as all get out, as the chairman and others are, that we can't get more done in Congress, immigration reform. You know who the biggest champion was of immigration executive action in the last 50 years? You know what president was? Ronald Reagan. Read his last speech he gave when he was in office. It was about immigrants. The party of Lincoln is dead, unfortunately. But we cannot allow that to deter us from the work that lies ahead. And that's why the Biden-Harris administration right now, I think, is so important at the moment.
So thank you for that, I appreciate it. One last question. How can the community connect with the work that the White House is doing so that we're successful in this next cycle?
Well, it's a big part of what we do together.
Absolutely.
We do these, we've done now for a year or two what we call Communities in Action, where we are highlighting the work in local governments. We just had a bunch of folks up from Texas highlighting the work they've done there, Ohio and elsewhere. Democracy is not a spectator sport, and notwithstanding the dysfunction that we frequently see here from the certain people here in Washington on the Republican side, there is so much remarkable work happening in states and local governments across the country, and there's remarkable work being done here. I believe this president will go down alongside FDR in terms of his accomplishment. And we've got to make sure that people know that, because if people don't know what we're doing, then they don't appreciate fully that elections have consequences. So what I would ask you all to do is get the word out and keep getting the word out.
Yeah, I'd say this last word. Tom referenced the Communities in Action program that we work on together, along with some of the folks at the White House that bring people in, community leaders, elected leaders, business folks, civil society, and literally do a complete information dump on everything that's happening at the White House, and the hopes of driving regional press, but also just raising awareness. I'd say this, that folks in this room are probably 2 steps beyond that. You're plugged in, you're informed, you're leaders in your community, you're legitimate ambassadors. And I would tell you that in the world in which we live now, different than the world in which some of us grew up in, where there were 3 middle-aged white guys that showed up at 6:30 who told you what the news was. Maybe your shock jock in the morning, your pay-per-view record, your African-American newspaper. now so many people get so much noise from so many different places. 20 different places, half of it not real news. It's so important that we engage with our brothers and sisters who need to hear from trusted sources. Sometimes the message is right, but the messenger is wrong. And it's so important that messengers take these messages out to people that help them understand that we are literally in a fight for the soul of this nation. I know we all get tired of hearing someone say this is the most important election in the history of our lives. This is the most important election in our lifetime. And if in fact we lose this, we could indeed lose the country. That is not hyperbole, it is real. So we need folks to step up, get involved, stay active, share the word, tell people that too many people whose names you will not see on this program, who you will not see mentioned here in Washington DC, gave up too much for us to have the opportunity to sit here in these fine suits and tell our stories. We need to recognize their sacrifice and show up and bring 10 more people with us every single election.
Amen.
Amen to that.
Thank you. You're everything. Thank you, sir. All right, see you soon. All right, next we're gonna bring up Chairman Horsford and Madam Mayor Patterson Howard. Yes. Sean, where's Sean Patterson Howard? How are you? Welcome. Thank you. Hey, sir, how are you? Oh, you got mics? How are you? Nice to see you. All right, listen, I'm not gonna make this hard for you if you want to sweat here. But we do have some incredible, important questions I want to engage you two on. So Chairman Horsford, Chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus, Madam Mayor of Mount Vernon, New York, as well as the President of the African American Mayors Association, right? Did I get it right? Okay, perfect. So two key players. So we've gone through the origins, the history, the inside game, outside game. Let's talk about now electoral sort of politics, the city level and at the federal level. I'd love for you both to open up with, Mr. Chairman, I'd love for you to open up with, tell us a little bit about what the conscience of the Congress is focused on and prioritizing now and going into the next election.
Well, good evening. It's great to be here. I want to thank Brother Michael Blake for organizing tonight's event, and to SEIU for their partnership and doing this event together. I'm Stephen Horsford. I represent Nevada's 4th District in Las Vegas and Central Rural Nevada. I currently chair the Congressional Black Caucus. We have 58 members. It's the largest in our history. Collectively, we represent 80 million Americans across the country, 18 million Black people. And we believe that when you lift up Black people and the Black community, you lift up everybody. And we are unapologetically Black in this moment because it's our people who are under attack. And it's the people who actually have made all this progress possible. But for the Black vote, there would be no President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. But for the Black vote, there would be no Congressional Black Caucus or the members that represent the districts throughout the country. And but for Black people who have saved democracy before, we won't be able to save it again. And so the Congressional Black Caucus in this moment understands our power is actually not in Washington, it's with the people. And so we launched Democracy for the People, a summer of action where we have taken the members to the people in 10 cities. We actually will end tomorrow this initial summer of action, this initial phase at the 60th March on Washington. And what have we been doing as part of this Democracy for the People? We've been doing town halls, youth forums, at local community centers, at HBCUs, in historic Black spaces, in order to talk directly with and listen to, most importantly, the people that we represent. We also have been conducting organizing training on the ground in partnership with organizations so that we could build a cohort of leaders in each district to help carry the work. And what is the work in this moment? Democracy, in my view, are the institutions of our schools, which are under attack, including Black knowledge, which is attempting to be erased. It's the Black press, which is under attack because of the disinformation and misinformation. And why? Because they don't want to have the power of the people expressed at the ballot box. It's also the institution of our courts. And despite all the progress that has been made in this administration, we're over 130 federal judges appointed, which is great, and one of the most diverse judiciaries. We still have Jim Crow era traditions like the blue slip that are being preserved in the Senate by Democrats. So this is not a partisan issue. And I call it the way I see it. And if there are people who are willing to preserve traditions like the Jim Crow practice that are going to prevent very highly qualified people, including Black individuals, from being confirmed in the United States Senate, then the Congressional Black Caucus is going to call that out. That's what it means to be the conscience of the Congress in this moment. We call it, whether it's our friends on the other side, whether it's bureaucracies that are preventing us from getting the opportunities that we need, or if it's those who are standing in the way of opportunity for our people.
Thank you for that. Madam Mayor, curious, I've watched the numbers of African American mayors grow, which is insanely encouraging. I'd love to get a sense from you, what's happening in cities, especially those led by Black mayors, that we might be missing here in Washington?
So
That's really making the difference in the issue of economic justice.
absolutely. So the African American Mayors Association, we represent over 500 Black mayors across the United States. And in November, with the election of Sherrell Parker in Philadelphia, 7 of the 10 most populous cities in the country will be led by Black mayors. Collectively, we represent 1/3 of the gross domestic product, cities led by Black mayors. And all of those things are really, really great. But some of our great challenges are issues like preemption. When we look in Jackson, where Mayor Shoboy Lumumba is, you have a governor that has taken over really the local courts and decided that the local courts and the judges that you have elected or the mayor has appointed no longer have the power. And the courts are going to be overseen by individuals that the governor has assigned and appointed who don't have our best interests in mind. We're also looking in places like Kansas City, where the police department, the governor or the executive wants to take over and assign those individuals who lead those departments. And so we are rising in numbers because we are getting people to come out and vote. But the challenge is when you are a Black mayor in a red state, oftentimes the overreaching of the government, when you hear Republicans, they always talk about big government and not liking big government. But when they are in charge in states and their most populous cities and where the biggest economic centers in government are, they're very interested in overreaching and taking over those communities. And so they speak one thing, but their actions show another. One of the things they told me as mayor, they said, look, all you have to do is make sure that you pave the streets, that the lights work, and the garbage is picked up on time. Those are the things that keeps people happy forever. We're dealing with violence in our communities. We're dealing with employment. Many of our cities are also dealing with asylum seekers. And when you're under-resourced and already overstretched, clearly we are sanctuary cities, but we need more support in order to help our cities thrive. We know that we want to make sure that everyone has rights and their rights are protected. But sometimes the resources that are given to our states do not trickle down to our cities. And so one of the things that we really fought for with the African American Mayors Association, the National League of Cities, the U.S. Conference of Mayors, is when the American Rescue Plan funding and other funding has come down for the federal government, that money does not come to the cities through the states. Because when FEMA money is given to Texas, it doesn't go to Dallas and Houston, where they have the biggest tragedies and crises. It stays within the state government. And even in states where you have blue governors, depending on who those governors are, it still does not get to the cities that need it most. And so mayors are responsible for for keeping the city safe, for delivering city services, the things that impact the day-to-day living of people the most. But when those powers are stripped from us because of governors or because of the Supreme Court telling us how to run our schools, looking at communities where HBCUs are, that's where a lot of our Black mayors are. We're dealing with affirmative action, but yet legacy enrollments and admissions were not overturned. That's a challenge. We have to address that. When you can't say Black, when you can't say brown, and those institutions become threatened, that's overreaching. And so we have to look at this. I'm a Delta, I'm a Private Masora. So, we are organizations that are very proud of our history. Our not-for-profit status is going to be challenged. And we work in our local communities. So in our civic organizations, when our schools are threatened, when our churches are threatened, it becomes a major issue on the local level. And it's challenging. It is very, very challenging. And so we're not just looking at local issues and day-to-day issues. We have to we have to keep our head on a swivel, looking at what's happening in the state and the federal government to ensure that we understand how that impacts. And as Steve said, that this election is of great consequence, but not just on the federal level, on the local level. Pay attention to your school board elections. Pay attention to your library elections. Know who your PTA president is, because the things that are happening on a local level, when we feel so overwhelmed because we're working 2 and 3 jobs just to try and afford rent, get our kids into good schools and keep them active and safe, that people who have time or who make time are now taking local offices that oftentimes we don't pay attention to until the local policies that affect us immediately start to change, and then we wake up.
No, go ahead. So you're absolutely right, we're being threatened on every side, and it's exhausting. I want to first acknowledge your leadership. I know how hard these jobs are. I take my hat off to both of you. I'd love to just hear, if you could just tell me really quickly, one sentence, what from Dr. King's legacy in this movement sort of keeps you engaged, motivated, moving, and forward-looking every day, these very tough jobs where not just you, but the people you represent are being threatened on all sides?
So, many people have their favorite quotes, and mine is, the ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in times of convenience and comfort, but where they stand in times of challenge and controversy. And we are living in challenging and controversial times. And so I found myself saying to my staff and to my family, I care so much I no longer give up. Right? And that doesn't mean to be reckless, but we have to move. People are moving out of these places of political correctness. And so, as you said, I'm Black, I'm unapologetically Black. I like brown, I love good rainbow coalitions, but we have to speak up. We have to be insistent, persistent, and consistent when we are pushing forward. We have to make sure that there is equity in our communities, and we have to make sure that we are speaking out against wrong, sometimes to your own personal hurt. And as leaders, we have to make tough decisions, even when those sometimes who we don't serve may not understand. But we have to open the doors, we have to hold them open, and we have to make sure that we are doing what we need to do in this time. It says we're called for such a time as this. And the question is, how will we show up?
Amen. I can't overstate how many times I've told this gentleman that now is your time, sir.
Ashley is a great encouragement. It's great to be here with the mayor. I will just say, Dr. King once said, any one of us can be great because all of us can serve. And I believe in that from a servant nature of leadership. In this moment, we all have power. The power doesn't only rest with the elected on high in Congress, the president, members of Congress, with all due respect, the mayor, or other elected officials. It rests with the people. And this democracy that we are working to fix and defend in this moment also applies to us, because it's the institutions that improve our quality of life. And so it actually speaks to why there are forces who are working to defund, to undermine, to suppress our ability to enjoy them, because they know they come with so much power. And so my only message to all of us is to take on that servant leadership role and to empower every single person to know there is something they can do beyond voting. That is an imperative. But to encourage everyone else to understand the importance of public education, of defending workers' rights, of protecting the free press, of ensuring that our courts are fair and free, and that our voting systems are open and accessible to all. When we do those fundamental things, then we'll achieve this March on Washington vision for jobs and freedom and equity and justice, because it's all of those things that will improve not only Black people, but all of us. And that is what I'm carrying on from Dr. King's legacy.
Next, thank you, sir. Next, I want to bring up Leo Martinez and Dr. Cheryl Davis. Can we give them a round of applause? Ms. Davis. Do you mind having a seat? Use your microphone. Okay, guys, sorry, we were just talking here. Okay, Leo, you've got an incredible title, ID Latino, and then you've been nominated by the president to be the head of the
Executive Director of the Inter-American Development Bank.
Very good, awesome. And then Ms. Davis, you are leading the reparations efforts in San Francisco with the Human Rights Commission?
That's correct.
That's right, perfect. So thank you both for being here. I'd love to just start with one question, and that is, what about where we are now keeps you up at night? And then how can the people in this room and those who are watching help support your work?
Thank you. I first want to thank Michael Blake for the opportunity to share. I will say, just by way of background for folks, I actually started my career as a kindergarten teacher, and so a lot of times I go to poems that I remember. And so when you say what keeps me up at night, I think the work around reparations and some of the things that we're doing in San Francisco reminds me of a Maya Angelou poem, Life Doesn't Frighten Me at All. And there's a line in there where it says, don't show me frogs and snakes and listen for my screams. If I'm afraid at all, it's only in my dreams. And I think what keeps me up at night is the fact that it's easier to live a life of terror than it is to dream. And so how do we create a space and a place where people believe in dreams, right? And I think about Dr. King talking about they fashioned within themselves a creative optimism. And I think it's getting harder and harder for people to be optimistic. And that's what really keeps me up, is how do we create a space where people continue to dream, continue to believe, continue to hope in the midst of things where it seems like it's hopeless. And what I would ask for, and what I've been thinking about, so pretty much everybody I see, I'm like, how can we have you come to San Francisco? How can we talk about the work? But how can we talk about the work in a way that is about hope? And that is about, yes, things are challenging, yes, things are difficult, but that with a little pressure, things can get better. I think about the work that we've been doing with reparations. We got all this backlash. The 15 members on the committee got death threats because of the recommendations that they made, because the work that they were doing, and people telling them to go back to wherever it was that they came from or threatening them. And that part of this is, how do we amplify and elevate the things that are working and that are happening, and really let people see that it's not all bad, that there is progress. I think Mayor Morial talked about it, right? Like, things are better. I remember John Lewis saying at one point, when folks would say to him how bad it was, and he was like, yes, I can say that things need to get better, but they're still better than when he first started on the journey. So I would, for me, the question or the request to come to San Francisco to talk about and celebrate the works that's being done, but to also hear about what's being done in other places, because San Francisco is less than 6% Black, but still has the same disparities where 50% of the people incarcerated are Black, 40% of the homeless population is Black. And I would just want to say thank you to SEIU, because the Black employees and the members of SEIU have been the ones that helped create the Office of Racial Equity in San Francisco, that have been intentional about calling out the disparities facing Black employees. We just need more voices in the chorus, is what I would say.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you to Michael Blake and our friends at SEIU for having us. Good question to start. What keeps me awake every night? And it's I think a good point to make comes from that telegram that Dr. King sent to Cesar Chavez back in 1966. Still keep me awake every night, thinking that from then until now, we've gone a long way, but we still have a long way to go, and Tom Pettis said just before us. And what he said in that telegram to Cesar Chavez was, our separate struggles are the same. He was talking to the leader of the Latino working class farmers movement. He said our separate struggles are the same, and it's a struggle for freedom, dignity, and for humanity. And when you think about that today, where we have a huge immigrant population in the United States that represents so much in our economy, and that are still, many of them in the shadows, and many of them trying to find a path to be uplifted and give everything they can to our country. It's a tremendous amount of work we have had. But then also the many folks that continue to migrate from Latin America to the United States because of lack of opportunity. So addressing the root causes of migration abroad through economic justice and development, and also thinking about those who are already part of the fiber of our country, it's a tremendous amount of work ahead of us. And it brings you back to that thought of Dr. King. It's our separate struggles are at the end the same.
Dr. Davis, you mentioned optimism, and the struggle for reparations is long, hard, exhaustive. How do you create optimism around an issue that seems immovable? And then I guess secondarily to that, how do you create a coalition around an issue such as reparations to galvanize some movement not just locally, other states and then nationally?
Yeah, I mean, there are two things I would say. First and foremost, I would say the pandemic was really important for us in San Francisco in the sense of it created a coalition that didn't exist before. When we saw what was happening with in San Francisco, the Latinx population was contracting COVID at higher rates, but like nationally, Black people were dying from it at higher rates. It forced this creation of different groups, one with the Latino population, another one specifically with Black folks. And they came together. I've talked to people who've been in the city their whole lives, 80, 90 years old, saying it's the first time they saw Black people actually be on the same page, organized, and show up together. So I would say that has already started and has begun and is continuing to move. And I think the thing that's been really helpful with optimism is after in 2020, when the civil unrest happened, Mayor London Breed committed $60 million a year specifically for the Black community. So we're in the third year of that, $180 million that has been allocated. And it was directed, all of it, by what community wanted to see done with it. And I think what is bringing people optimism is that for 5 years prior, the down payment assistance program for the city and county of San Francisco saw 5 Black people go through the program. And then when we did this program and we invested where folks could get $500,000 specifically for Black folks and being very intentional, we saw 22 Black people go through that program in 6 months. $500,000 to each of them to buy a home in San Francisco, something that had not been done before. So 100 businesses were funded and supported during that process. So now we're seeing people with many grants and with the opportunity, and they can actually see the investment, so they believe in it. And now they're like, well, if we can do this with something that's not reparations, what would happen if we actually got reparations? And so they're staying united on that front and very excited about the work that's happening locally as well as the California State Reparations Task Force and working with folks like Robin Bruce Simmons in Evanston. So I would say for me as someone who, I often joke that I've been in San Francisco 30 years, but I still can't say I'm from there, because people are like, you have to be born here. But in the 30 years that I've been there, it's the first time that I've seen people really feel like, and I would say specifically Black folks, feel seen, feel valued, and feel heard. And that's gone a long way for how we're able to move the work.
Leo, one last, Michael Blake's giving me the wrap up. So one last quick question. You spoke about Chavez and King. I'd love to get your thoughts on where we are now with Black Brown Coalition. Where do we, and how do we strengthen that going into this next election cycle? With so much on the line for both communities.
Oh, well, the previous panel said that this was a fundamental election, probably the most important in our life. And we've gone through a couple of cycles before where we were saying that. But I think it's evident again, especially after the Biden-Harris administration came to the White House, and everything they're trying to do and have done over the past couple of years, just thinking about the possibility that any of that could be reversed, that there could be a regression on that, it keeps all of us in this room pretty much aware of the importance of that Black and Brown coalition. Because at the end, it's the struggle of working class folks. It's the struggle of people trying to find better education for their children through public schools. It's the struggle of all of our families trying to find dignity in the job and trying to find the adequate compensation and benefits for the work they do. So I think there's incredible awareness of that in both of our communities. And if there were any time in the past where you saw tensions existing between the two groups, the two constituents, I now see an incredible brotherhood and sisterhood coming together, in the sense that we all understand that we're in this together. I am optimistic that it's going to be a very powerful message coming from Black and brown communities in the next cycle, in the next presidential election. People who really are not going to give up in their fights and are pretty much appreciative of the empowerment that we can see happening if we continue to sustain the policies we have today. I think there's awareness of that, and I'm very optimistic that we will see a strong showing and a strong message coming from our communities.
Well, thank you both. Can we give them a round of applause? Thank you, sir. So next I'm gonna hand it over to Michael Blake, who's gonna conduct the next fireside chat.
Can we clap it up for Ashley? You're now seeing why she gets paid the big bucks to be a CBS News political commentator. So when you see her on CBS, now you know, like, oh, I saw her in person right there. And I've always given her the flowers that she deserves. The photo, there were several photos during the number 45. I don't like calling his name from time to time. But when you see there's a photo in the elevator as they were going through the impeachment proceedings with Speaker Pelosi and Congressman Schiff. But it was Ashley who was the one that was there that was actually prepping everyone and getting them ready. So it is always important to recognize our history and knowing that there was a Black woman that was organizing all that behind the scenes right there. So before we bring this home in our closing fireside, Malachi, you ready? Malachi Bird. So many people may not realize that we've had incredible excellence when it comes to poet laureates. And he was the inaugural one for DC. And you can't talk about social justice. You can't recognize the movement without having spoken word and in that space. So before we do anything else to bring this all home, let's bring on up Malachi right now.
All right, good evening.
Good evening.
So I'm going to be performing this piece, was a fusion of two pieces that speak on my DC experience and my perspective on labor and capital. But before that, I have to do this because I'm a spoken word performer. So I just need to teach y'all how to react to me really quickly. Okay, first of all, can we get some snaps in here? Get some snaps in here. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And my second thing that I need in response is, y'all know you ever have like a bomb plate, like a really good plate of food that I need that on the count of three. 1, 2, 3. Lovely. All right, my name is Malachi Malpractice Bird, and this is my poem. The moment an occupation outweighs my boundaries, I run away. Freedom seeking and self-emancipating from being anyone else's capital, especially in the place where I'm from. Because my people are as free as freedom. Meaning that everything about this existence came at a cost. Someone with their wrong intentions in the wrong pocket bought my city and put us on the auction block, bought us here against our will, gentrified our city against our will, and still I have nothing for my children to inherit. So when I say that I am my ancestors' wildest dreams, I mean that I quit. I mean that anything and everything that makes me more labor than love is not on the agenda. I mean that no content that is corporation or cotton will control my content or my character. I mean, when I say I'm my ancestors' wildest dreams, I mean, do not ask me what I want to be when I grow up, because I do not dream of labor. I mean that this country wants to make me into a product, into capital. And in this place, I promise that I will never be a penny or a percentage. I tell my descendants that we will never be picked or picked on again. But how come in the nation's capital, Martin Luther King Avenue is now the most gentrified? How come on I know, right? How How come in the nation's capital, Martin Luther King Avenue is now the most gentrified? How come the Instagram story for DC looks like an advertisement for Clorox? How come I ask my people how metal will be the death of us? We look for the guns, but the cranes get in the way. How come I've seen more white chalk in the streets than I have in my classrooms? How come I know folks that love my city more than they love the people that made it? How come in my city, my name is more likely to be a box in the morgue than it is to be at the top of a mortgage? But the year is 2045 and I am the last native left in DC. A man on a bullhorn tells me that I have 3 minutes to leave the city I'm from or they will open fire on me. And this gives me a sense of pride because death doesn't scare someone whose home has vanished before his eyes, and I knew this day would come. I heard that if you yell at the top of your lungs in the city you're from, that breath can circle the earth and catch you when you need it most. So I pray that this poem be a planet-sized propeller that prevents my people from being pushed across the Potomac. When you speak on my city, you must speak on our triumph the same way you speak on our pain. Because if we're being honest, in DC today, I'm not scared of being robbed. I'm scared of Starbucks, dog parks, and bike lanes. And if we're being honest, this place is so difficult. Watching the place you learned how to read become a Trader Joe's. And this poem started writing itself in 2012 when Ward 8 didn't have a trauma unit. So when Southeast didn't have a trauma unit, so Ward 8 victims were pushed to the bottom of the call log. It started in 2022 when someone told me they were from DC and they were really from Waldorf. And what seems like a microaggression is actually the difference between ruins and a renaissance, because language is the reason you hear violent and criminal and think of Southeast before you think of the Pentagon. This poem is about how this place is not parsley for your palate. It is not an Instagram caption. It is not a revolving door. It is not a pit stop. It's not even the nation's capital anymore, because no amount of capital can unbound the blood bond I got with these blocks, the soul ties I got with these streets. The year is 2045 and I am the last native left in DC. Muriel Bowser is on her 10 millionth consecutive term. Martin Luther King Avenue is now Wall Street. Skyscrapers lace what used to be the heart of the South Side, and this big chair is all that I got left. So this city, I will 1965 ride for it, because what is a city if not the people that died for it? My body belongs with my people. It is not up for audit. Screw your mortgage. You do not own this land just because you bought it. When you speak on DC, remember that I was the native that always talked about his city like a state. Remember, I was the native whose congas never lost their crank. Remember, I was the native that always talked about his city like a state. Remember, I died for the place that gave me life.
Y'all out here talking about encore. I'm gonna need a collection plate right now. So let's keep this moving here. The way to bring this all together is us recognizing the special moment that we have. So at this time, I'm going to ask for our president of 1199 SEIU, George Gresham. I'm going to ask also for our co-founder of Until Freedom, Tamika Mallory. Come on up at this time. We clap it up for both of them. Come on. And I'm going to ask for them to give an initial answer to this question before I go to why we all here. You know, yeah, I'm just saying. To Tamika and to President Gresham, our focus on being here tonight is not just about what we do for tonight and not what we do for a weekend. It's what happens after this. And so would love to just hear from both of you. What is your why that is keeping you going right now? Because it's real easy for us to get lost in the moment. But what is keeping you going? President Gresham and then Tamika.
Sure. I'll begin with my 5 grandchildren. That's a big why. Because they have re-radicalized me. You know, I know that I am an OG by standards. But I also remember as an OG that my most militant years was when I was younger. And I'm trying to grab the youth, find the right language, find the right inspiration to motivate the youth to take this over. 63 is not only the anniversary of a great march for jobs and freedom, but it's my 60th anniversary from leaving the segregated South. When my parents brought me up after 9 years living with my grandparents because they could not afford to raise children in the South, the first generation of migration. And when I think of that march in 1963, it hurts immensely to know that what was built and fought for and died for is being taken back again. That it's about public policy. Public policy, it controls everything in our lives. And that's controlled by politics. And I need to make sure that I'm trying to let the youth know that that is the way. We can't become, complacent. We can't think that things cannot change. We cannot think that the difference between the two parties is negligible. That kind of thinkers got us to many colorful people in here for me to be George. That kind of thinking is what's got us the Supreme Court that we have now. That's slowly but surely taking away our rights. That people have the nerve to talk about slavery as if it was a job training program for our people. That they brought the slaves over. They didn't bring no goddamn slaves over. They brought free men and women over and enslaved them. That's who they brought over. So this moment is to capture that militancy, that vibrancy of the youth and set them on fire. Let them know that we can take this back. And I gotta do it. I got 5 grandchildren that deserve to see a more perfect youth. And I'm ready. This is the moment when you think about what Dr. King did and all of those others. It really was sacrifice. We have to be willing to sacrifice. I've had a good time, but I'm an OG. My sacrifice has to be about making the future for everyone.
George took my first wife, which is my granddaughter. She is about to be 11 months old. And when I look at her, certainly my why has a lot to do with what the world will look like when she is not just my age, but just a little bit older, when she's actually able to realize what is happening around her. I want her not to have to deal with the same things that I've been fighting for. But I will say that my why today, or my why now that George took my granddaughter away from me, is around the idea that I had too many close relationships with mothers that I would never have met if it were not for the fact that their child died and they needed me and others, us, to come to their defense in the most horrific situations. So when I look at Breonna Taylor's mother, Tamika Palmer, or Trayvon Martin's mother, Sabrina Fulton, and the list goes on. I mean, even Shanquella Robinson's family, young sister beat to death in Mexico by a group of people who she believed to be her friends. I've become all too close to these individuals who I probably would have never encountered. And they become my why because in a lot of ways, our work and the fact that we never give up, that we continue to fight for them is all they have. That's what they're hanging on. When I think about Breonna Taylor's family and the fact that we are still in Kentucky, that even now we're going back to Kentucky to fight to ensure that Daniel Cameron does not become governor after he was an obstructionist to justice in terms of prosecuting the officers who murdered her. Tamika Palmer, when she looks at us, there was a time her daughter was killed on March 13th and people did not show up other than some, of course, local voices. We always want to make sure we appreciate and respect those individuals who were out there on the ground. But in terms of bringing an international movement to that situation and making sure that she was not lost between Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd, because she was literally murdered right between those two incidents, which were significant, which makes it even harder to get attention for Black women. When she looks at the fact that it took 2.5 months for anyone to even call her name, for her to even get posted on social, for people to even understand what happened to her daughter, I'm sure that she has to give, and she says it all the time, so much credit to the work that Attorney Ben Crump and all of us put into that situation. And so that becomes my why, because I can't give up when I'm looking at mothers and families who, but for the grace of God, it could be any one of us, including me right now. And so I know that I have to keep going, and I think, Michael, also I want to be honest in saying that a part of it is a little bit of anger and frustration. I'm mad at Daniel Cameron. So when I get up in the morning, I'm like, oh, you think you're gonna run for governor? Oh, okay, don't worry. And there was an article out a couple weeks ago, last week or sometime, and it said that, Until Freedom, my organization, they said they were coming, they did this big press conference, and they said they're coming and nothing has been done, and there's been little to nothing. I said, now, when have you ever seen us show up somewhere, have a press conference, say we're coming? I'm like, we're coming in the night, like beast, and we're going to kick ASS. I ain't gonna say what I really want to say in front of my big sister, Dr. King, and Bishop over there, Mackenzie, but we are coming to kick butt in the night, and we got 2 months to do it. And so I'm on vacation right now, Michael, and you keep telling me I'm on vacation, and when I get back to work on September 3rd, on September 4th, it's going to be all about defeating Daniel Cameron, and more than defeating him, it's about defeating fascism, defeating racism, defeating oppression, and defeating anyone and anything that thinks it's okay to have a Black woman shot down while she was sleeping in her home that has so much promise, and taking her life and thinking that they can lie and cover it up and not ensure that there be justice for her. I have to go to the airport. I love y'all so much. Thank you for everything you're doing, Michael. Let's give him love and continue to thank you so that you can keep bringing us all together. God bless. Love you all. Love you, Jordan.
Per usual, Tamika has the mic drop. So at this moment, this is the perfect opportunity. We're talking about celebrating a family. If we can, ladies and gentlemen, if we can put our hands together and show love to the CEO of the King Center, the daughter of Dr. King. Come on, we can do better than that. We can do better than that. For those that couldn't see, there's a beautiful moment of Dr. King and President Gresham just being able to connect right there. I say this to you all when obviously in private conversations as well, but you are the legacy And it is our responsibility to have your back. Because for all except for 3 people, you know, Dr. King obviously is the legend that we all know, but that's your daddy. Coretta Scott King is your mom. And we didn't tell her that we were gonna have that photo over there. Can we set the ground, because we've heard both President Gresham and Tamika talk about family. How do you want people to be thinking about your father and your mother? Because it's not just a civil rights legend, that's you.
I'm gonna start this way. Everybody in this room may not know it, but we're all a gift to the world. When we discover that and we start living out of that, I think we can revolutionize the world. I said that just to say, that is my mom and dad. And I thank God that He chose my mother to incubate me, my father to intersect with my mother, with that sperm and egg, to get me to this earth, to continue what they sacrificed for. I was asked a question in 2018 about, this was the 50th anniversary of my father's assassination. And how was I feeling, and, you know, in terms of, you know, missing my father and, you know, the sacrifice that you all made. Can you give us some thoughts about that? It took me a minute to get to this place, maturity, life experiences. But I looked at those reporters and I said, you know what? If Bernice A. King had to do it all over again, I wouldn't change a thing. I wouldn't change the fact that my mother and father, my father, sacrificed his life, lost his life. His life was taken from him at a very early age. And we lost the presence of a father and a household because it had to shift my mother as well. And the reason why I wouldn't change a thing is because Martin King and Coretta Scott King were gifts to this world. And I can't imagine the world we live in today without them and what they've done. And so I can deal with my emotions because I'm there now. I can manage those with my friends and my, you know, safe circles and process through that and not let it get in the way of being a vessel for God to do what I need to do to continue this powerful legacy. That's why, you know, I don't spend a lot of time thinking about what is Bernice A. King's legacy, because people ask me that all the time, what's your legacy? You got a legacy too, girl. And I say to people, this is the issue. I was born into a legacy. So when you're born into something that the world still needs, if I get caught up in me and my particular legacy, then I'm not going to do what's necessary to ensure that the legacy that I was born into continues. So my job is not to carve out a separate legacy, but to discover my role in the legacy to continue it. And that's what I've been doing, you know? So I think, you know, God chose me in this season to be the head of the King Center. It's not something I wanted to do. It was never part of my plans. But in many ways, the King Center has grown me up because you can't head an institution called the Martin Luther King Jr. Center for Nonviolent Social Change and not deal with some things. Because I've struggled with anger probably all of my life, obviously because of what happened to my father, what happened to my uncle,
that we still haven't, discovered, what was behind his death. It wasn't a drowning. We believe he knew some things about my father's assassination. There was some foul play involved. What happened to my grandmother who was shot in church when I was 11, 6 from my uncle. So I had a lot of anger growing up. And eventually resentment for being in that family because I was mad at the world. And yet I was living this life where I was trying to figure out, why am I here? What is life about? And all of that kind of stuff. And I didn't want to have to deal with this king thing. But God knew how to get me in the center of his will and called me into ministry. When I was 17, I ran for 8 years and finally accepted that call the night before my 25th birthday. And so carrying that anger year after year after year after year has been a heavy burden because I went through a phase where I hated all white people. Nobody knew it because I grew up in a house where my mother taught me how to conduct myself. But internally, that hate was festering inside, and I especially hated white men. And I know this is gonna sound weird to the average person because everybody has a different story. But in 2000, I was a part of an interview with an evangelical minister. And he started asking me questions about my daddy and growing up and being without my father and all of that. And in the middle of the conversation, as I was talking, he said, "Can I give you a hug?" Now inside, I was like, hell no. You white man. Yeah, you're the reason. But, talk better, so I let him give me a hug. And literally, it was one of the most sincerest hugs I had ever received. Now, people are like, that's crazy. But it did something to me. It saved me from poisoning myself with hate. It meant that I became naive and suddenly began to think, that there's not still issues of race and racism, in our society. There's still not people who are racist. But it started me on a healing journey, not to do a broad stroke, but more importantly, to cleanse myself so that I could be the vessel that I am today for God, to let his love work through me. Because if the truth be told about Martin Luther King Jr., it was the power and the strength of love that drove that movement. I mean, it was a deep love. Now, everybody in the movement didn't operate from the same foundation and frame of reference as Martin Luther King Jr., but he had to be at that place so for the rest of them to come somewhere in the vicinity. So he had to be very strong in it. And I feel that my journey now, being at the center and having to really wrestle with me and that anger and learning how to process that anger and channel that anger appropriately to fight against injustice. And I heard Tamika, and I know she didn't mean it this way, because in nonviolence, you don't try to defeat and destroy people. You defeat and destroy injustice, because you do believe in the redemption of people. I can't be a Christian and not believe in the redemption of people. But I also understand that as I fight against that injustice, and even as the people continue to do evil and unjust things, they may not be redeemed, but I put them in the hands of God, because I know God can deal with them in a way that I can't deal with them. And he knows how to convert hearts in a way that I don't know how to convert hearts. And if it be the case, he knows how to do things that we can't do legally in this country. Because there's no jail to put him in. There's no prosecutor to prosecute him. So he knows exactly what needs to be done, and it's the will of him that none of them suffer. But they come to repentance, but they have to make that choice. So, long story short, I'm at an institution that my mother founded to perpetuate the work of my father.
And when you talked about this picture, you know, I've seen that picture a lot of times, and it wasn't until probably around the 50th anniversary of his assassination that I really looked at it. Now, I don't remember the picture, you know, but I thought it was pretty deep when I looked at it, because I'm very intensely looking at my dad like he is giving me some instructions. And I believe there's something going on there spiritually that maybe as a child I didn't fully understand. My dad had to pass some things to me in a sense. So I think that was an anointing moment for me, from my dad. And I feel that every day that I wake up, I feel like I have this great responsibility to continue the freedom struggle because of what he sacrificed and what my mother sacrificed. And so it's in my DNA. Yeah, I don't feel like worn out in the struggle. Now, do I feel worn out sometimes because if you overdo it too much, you'll get exhausted just in your human body? Yes, but in my spirit, I don't feel worn out. And I think that's what this generation has not tapped into yet. When the people back in the 50s and 60s were struggling against injustice, those people were coming from a deep spiritual place. They had a strength and a faith that was unshakable. You know? And we've gotten a long way away from that, and we keep trying to do it in our own intellectual might, you know, in our own skill sets. But we gotta have spiritual strength, because the demons we're fighting today, the evil we're fighting today, it is intransigent, it is intractable. I mean, it is deep, very deep. And it has literally come to destroy people and communities and break the spirits of people. And so, you know, that's why I have to keep my vessel clean. Because if I am full of hate, if I am full of resentment, you know, I can't allow God's spirit to move through me. That's what moved through Martin Luther King. You can't face Bull Connor and his dogs and his water holes and all of that hatred in your own strength and power. You gotta be a vessel for something greater than yourself to do it, because it's nonsense. What human being is gonna stand up and let somebody whoop them upside the head? You're just not. Because your human instinct is gonna be, hell no. I'm coming for your head, and I'm gonna do everything I gotta do to take you out before you take me out. So God used Martin King. God used them in that movement for us. What are we doing for the next generation? Who said the word sacrifice? Thank you. There's a sacrifice that this generation has to be willing to make. They put it all on the line. And they didn't know from day to day what the return was going to be, but in their spirit, they believed at some point there was going to be a KAIROS moment. There's going to be a KAIROS moment. Meaning that God was going to intersect time and meet them in that moment and usher in the change and transformation that was needed. These moments keep coming and we miss them. And when you have them, you gotta be grateful. The children of Israel missed the promised land because they weren't grateful. And when we see things happening today and we're mad about it, we're frustrated about it, and we're angry about it, I understand. I feel the same way. But then I catch myself and I say, I'm grateful for these KAIROS moments. That was a KAIROS moment, believe it or not, that happened in the George Floyd case. We were all on the edge, holding our breath, wondering what was going to happen with that verdict. Were y'all in that place that day? I mean, most of us were probably thinking, it's not going to be good. Some people are thinking, I hope. And I just felt in my spirit, and I could hear the Lord saying, it's gonna happen. You know why? Because he knew at that moment, humankind, not just Black people, yes, Black people certainly, but humankind needed that conviction. They needed that victory in that moment, not against the police officer, but they needed that victory to continue to fight and struggle. That's what Montgomery was about. They needed that at 360, about 60, 65 days, when the Supreme Court ruling came down and my dad and his back was against the wall. People don't know that story. That they were getting ready, the city officials were getting ready to rule, or they filed an action in the court so that the boycott could be ruled illegal. And if that happened, guess what? How were the people gonna get around? Were they gonna have the strength, and determination to keep moving forward? And my mother said it was one of the darkest moments in Montgomery, Alabama for my daddy and the rest, because at that point, they didn't know what to do. They had been strategizing every time they had another tactic, they were strategizing constantly, in the middle of the night, just strategizing day after day after day. But this moment came and it was like, oh my God, we don't know what to do, where we gonna go, what's gonna happen. But they had such great faith. And while they were in court, an AP reporter came into the courtroom, and there was ruckus in the courtroom, and people were wondering what's going on, and they brought the paper to them. Because back then, it was, didn't travel as fast. We had no IG. Ex-Twitter. All that. And it said, bus segregation is unconstitutional. Supreme Court ruled. That was a victory for them. In the very darkest moment where they didn't know what was going to happen. That was their KAIROS moment. God intercepted in time and spoke through the Supreme Court. And it gave them hope, lifted up their heads, and it started the ripple effect. That's what gave the strength to the student movement, Montgomery, because they needed a victory. So when we have these small things, don't get stuck in them, but praise God for that moment. Knowing, yes, my daddy still knew we didn't have the right to vote, we didn't have Civil Rights Act. But that moment was an important moment that gave people the hope that she was talking about earlier with reparations, feeling hopeless, that gave them the hope. So we need more voices today that can speak through the darkness to give people the hope to keep moving forward. That's what Martin King was, for the movement. I don't know where that voice is today.
For someone who was telling me beforehand, I'm not really sure what I'm going to say. You just dropped all kinds of gems right there. We just show love right out the gate. There's two pieces to tie in, and President Gresham, you mentioned obviously the impact of the speech as well, so I'm gonna bring you in on this as well. But people don't really internalize when your father, and I'm always going to say that, your father gave that speech, you were 5 months old.
On that day, literally.
5 months.
Grace.
The speech that has changed generations, literally, right? And Ashley, when Ashley first came in, she was talking through, you actually was circling there were 10 clear demands, right, that were articulated. Help us to understand how the speech has impacted you down the line. Because as soon as you came in, even when you walked in, you were like, people need to remember there were demands here.
That's right.
Like this was not a theoretical exercise. They came in for business. And then when you enter that, President Gresham, it'd be great to hear how do we sustain this effort with the unions and with movements, right? We don't just show up for March, we show up to actually win.
Yeah, this was part of the greater strategy you know, to get federal legislation, you know. And, no demonstration without legislation. When we show up in Washington, or in state houses, wherever we show up, we need to come with demands, but these people have been working together, you know, before all of this. And so they were clear on what needed to happen. And so those 10 demands were a part of that. And I want people to know that that day was not just about an iconic I Have a Dream speech. It was about a foundation that was laid to break up some of the fallow ground in the United States of America around civil rights. Because we didn't have the Civil Rights Act then.
That's right.
And if you think about where we are today, when you look at those 10 demands around the Civil Rights Act, around housing and withholding of federal funds where there's discrimination in housing and employment, you know, the Justice Department being able to initiate injunctive suits where there are constitutional violations. We benefit from that today. So every movement needs to capture some demands, and not just in a moment, but in a movement that says we gonna stick with it. That's why I like Tamika, because they didn't go into Kentucky, you know, for a moment and left. They have been very consistent around the issue with Breonna Taylor, the way she's been treated, and the harm and the danger that other people of, you know, black skin, brown skin are in, you know, as a result of Cameron. So there's persistence, you know, there's focus. And sometimes we get out focus, you know, and we're trying to do this, and we water down our strength. Some kind of way we've got to figure out what are the 3 or 4, because even when they had the 10, all of them were not fulfilled. The $2 minimum wage, when you look today, that's about $17, close to $18. So we're behind. We're asking for 50. We need to be asking for 20. Right. Maybe 25. Am I being unrealistic? No. So, yeah. So for me, you know, it's about those demands and how we are benefiting from so many things today, and yet we're facing a lot of backlash. And I said out there too, and this is very important, I'm gonna let him speak. When we are trying to move forward, or when we are moving forward, when we're organizing, when we're mobilizing, when we're seeking to progress our nation, we have to always understand that there's going to be backlash, which means we have to simultaneously, in our organizing efforts to get, you know, certain legislation, we got to understand we also have to plan for backlash. What is the strategy? So we need the minds in the movement who think about, as we do this, what are the possible implications negatively that may come, so that we can already be ready. Because you can best believe that what we've seen sweeping the nation recently was a part of a strategy and a plan. Those that are, and I'm not gonna say Republicans because it's not all, I'm gonna say those that are members of the Republican Party, they've been strategizing and planning a long time. When certain things were happening, they got their plan and strategy together to do what they've done. So we have to think about that while we're moving forward. Keep our strategy too for the backlash, so we're not caught off guard, because we got caught off guard real bad this time. Boston has been run, seriously. And I'm concerned.
That's a Spades reference, but yeah, we're still waiting for the right day.
Oh.
Yeah, some of them got confused about that, right?
No, Boston is, it's rich.
No, it's Boston. No, you play Boston.
Yeah, you put them on.
Absolutely.
All right, I was talking about this.
You talking about Bill?
I'm between two generations.
For me, it's really about living up to the ideals. I came to 1199 because I wanted to be a part of the movement. And the history had taught me that as an African American man, I had a greater chance of being in prison or dying for life than realizing freedom. But I joined many organizations anyway, both overcover and undercover. But none of them lasted because they were too narrow in the way that they practiced what they did. When I got to 1199 and I began to know the history, 1199 wasn't birthed for the fact that they want to be a union to raise the dollars for members. They wanted to fight for social justice. 11 pharmacists that were doing okay, 11 Jewish pharmacists that were doing okay, decided that in the hospitals, the service workers were not making a living wage. And they committed themselves to organize them. So what did they first do? They went to then Governor Nelson Rockefeller to get the law changed because the law made it illegal for healthcare workers to join the union. And then to me, what Leon Davis, the first president of 1199 did was miraculous. He went to these hospital workers, most of them migrants from the South and from Puerto Rico, most of them women of color. And he went to them and taught them to fight for their rights. Now, women from the South at that time had no real reason to believe in anything a white man said. They just didn't have that reason. He motivated them in a way, and as someone that was mentored by Leon Davis as a delegate, he was not easy to understand. He had a strong Yiddish accent, yelled at me many times. I don't know what the heck he said, but I can tell he wasn't pleased. But he was part building a movement, and now that's why I said what I said earlier, because I see the wisdom in it. Because not only did he create a broader movement to bring everyone into the light, but he made sure it was the youth. Who would have thought that here I am carrying on the tradition that he brought me into this movement? We brag all the time that we were Dr. King's favorite union.
Yep.
We have recordings 6 weeks before his assassination, where he calls us the authentic conscience of the labor movement. That he's been with 1199 for so long, he considers himself a fellow 1199er. And we have to live up to that standard. If Dr. King were alive today, would we still be his favorite union? And so our job is to be about social justice, not just about putting the bread on the table, but the dignity that comes with putting the bread on the table. You can't have a real movement of raising people's working conditions if they're not getting justice, if they're not the disparities. Look at what just happened with COVID. Giving an example of the disparities of health in our communities versus other communities. Who were the first to die?
That's right.
It was us. Why? Because we, for the most part, did not have good quality health care. And COVID was something that you had to be in really good shape to survive it in the beginning. So this, in a disparate way, we lost more lives than we should have because the healthcare is not there. When you look at the system today, I'm trying to stay focused on the subject. But when you look at the system today, the hospitals that serve Medicaid to the patients, that's our communities many times, they get 3/4 of the dollar that the private hospitals get. And so we do not have the services, the preventive maintenance that keeps us alive, the education, the nutrition, the benefits of a quality of life that people deserve, older people. So I am now in the tradition, I believe, of Dr. King, has started a nonviolent healthcare revolution. And I hope that before we're finished, it won't be a story that starts in New York and ends in New York, but a national story. It is outrageous. And Dr. King said of the many, many discriminations that exist in this country, he finds, I'm paraphrasing, the most offensive to be that of healthcare. And so that we are guided, we've been given a legacy and a mission. And I tell people in my job, we are blessed, we've grown, thanks to the work of your mother, but also helping us to organize. We're 450,000 members. But with us, I tell staff sometimes, you know, we all moan and groan, like Reverend King said, we get tired, our bodies get tired. And it's okay to get tired. It is not okay to give up. And when you give up, then you're in the wrong place. You know, people start out very good and skilled in athletics. When they can't hit the home run anymore, they know it's time to move on. If they can find another position to play, if not, move on. We can't stay in these positions of leadership and not lead. And that's part of what's wrong with the labor movement, to be quite honest. I'm very honest about the labor movement. I don't pretend that we were always welcome in the labor movement. But as the workforce is changing, so did I. When the brother talked about the unions that fought and supported Dr. King in the 1963 March for Jobs and Justice, it was just a few. To be quite honest, it wasn't a lot. And those, so maybe I'll get two, but I won't get two.
No, go on, you're ready.
But the moment for us has come. The moment has come for us to go back and give inspiration to the young people, find the language that they understand, and use their skills. They want what we want. They don't want anything less. You know, my first speech that I gave, and I'll try to end this because you don't give a union organizer a microphone without a time. My first speech that I gave, I wasn't sworn in as president. I had been elected as president. And I had to go to John F. Kennedy Library in Massachusetts to give a speech. And I was nervous about it because I was raised in the South, segregated, and now I'm gonna speak to an all-white audience. No matter how confident I felt in myself, I was nervous. Am I gonna give the right speech? And then a good friend of mine who's a super lefty did me a favor by writing a speech for me. I didn't get the speech till I got on the plane. I read that and I said, he gonna scare the hell out of these people. You know, I read they got me quoting Malcolm X and everything. I said, they ain't trying to see me come up there and do that. And so I was the keynote speaker, program ran over. So I said, you know, my grandmother taught me not to compete with lunch. That was coming next. So I tore up the speech in front of that, gave a dramatic pause. But then I didn't know what I was gonna say. So what did I do? I started talking about the same thing I would if the audience was black. And guess what? I got 5 standing ovations because at the end of the day, we all want the same things for our family. It's no different. There's no black gold, no Latino gold, no gold for our communities that we have. Everybody wants the same thing for the generation. And if we can find that common ground when we speak with people, and if we can understand this ain't gonna be given to you, you gotta be willing to sacrifice. How many of us wouldn't be willing to sacrifice to know that our grandchildren and the future behind us can have a better life? That's my mission. I want to thank you, Sister Kate, for your father and all the inspiration. And would love one day for you to come to see 1199. We've moved our headquarters and it's been redesigned by Sir David Valdez, who did the Civil Rights Museum. And so we curated because we're a movement. And we have all, it's a tribute to Dr. King and all those people that fought in the days of injustice. The same time Leon Davis was organizing, he was also fighting against the Vietnam War. He was also fighting against segregation that was happening in this country. He included all of that, and that's why he is the only labor leader in 1199 that was supported by Dr. King, by A. Philip Randolph, but believe this, Malcolm X as well. And so we have a tradition, we have a legacy. I'm an OG, but you know, my secretary treasurer is back. And we're going to keep pushing this union for the reward that is promised to us if we make sure that we put the effort in getting that reward. So tomorrow, it is not a commemoration. It is a continuation of the struggle, and I hope when people leave this town on tomorrow or Sunday, that they leave refortified and ready. If we did it once, we can continue to do it in an even stronger way.
We're about to bring this home, seeing a few tears in the eyes. That's just powerful moments. So first and foremost, 1199 SEIU has a presentation that they would like to do with Dr. King. Secretary Treasurer Millie Silva. Let's clap it up for Millie and 1199.
So, one, I just want to recognize that as we're experiencing this moment, that we are here at our SEIU, welcomed by our International President, Mary Kay and Henry, on behalf of all of the SEIU members across the country. And then I'm so glad that I'm here with my president, George Gresham, the president of 1199 SEIU. George has talked about your father and your mom, and I want you to know that there is not a 1199 member who does not claim them as part of their family. When we moved our headquarters, one of the things that we did, and George referred to this, is that there are murals at our headquarters. And they are part of the images that people will see when they come to our home at 1199. There's no question that we believe that it is our responsibility to figure out how we can honor who they were, their sacrifice, and it is a blessing for me to be here with you tonight. And I wanted to share with you 2 of what are our favorite images, which we wanted to share with you. So this is an image of Coretta Scott King wearing one of the 1199, what were at the time the blue and white caps that we wore when we were organizing workers across the country and in struggle at one of our events, speaking with a young child who we believe might have been an 1199, if not child of a member, a child that was soon to be a member of 1199.
And then this is the other, and George referred to this, which is of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. speaking at the 1199 headquarters. That's our podium, that was our 1199 sign, where he actually shared the words where he was challenging us to do right, to rise up, and to be the consciousness of the labor movement, and to do everything that is possible. And so know that on behalf of President George Gresham, on my behalf, on behalf of the 450,000 members of our union, we stand ready to stand with you, to stand with everyone, to continue the work. The work is not yet done, and so on this eve of the 60th anniversary of the March on Washington for jobs and freedom, let us do the work and let's stand together.
So what we're gonna do now is to bring this all home. As said to Dr. King, she obviously gets the last word of remarks. So we're gonna exit stage so she can give us a clarion call, and immediately after her is one of my big brothers in the ministry, Reverend Gerald Durley, who is one of the few who can actually say that they have been in this movement throughout, and is going to be blessing us as one of the speakers on tomorrow. And so the appropriate way to close this out, obviously, is in prayer. So I'm asking if we can show love one more time to our Secretary Treasurer of 1199, Millie Silva, and our President of 1199, George Gresham. And now for our closing word from the CEO of the King Center, Reverend Dr. Bernice A. King.
So, a lot's been said today, and it's been a long day. But there's something I want to capture out of this entire event and these various conversations. There's one thing that we must always hold on to, and that is not just hope, but understanding the we factor. One of the reasons that a lot of people rallied around President Barack Obama, whom you worked for, is because he helped everybody to understand that we can do this. Not somebody else, but we. One of the most important things that the children of Israel missed is that when it came time to keep moving forward toward their promised land, two of them only understood the we factor. The rest of them got too caught up in themselves and not understood that the journey ahead could only happen with the collective. I'm saying that because so many people feel tired and discouraged, because sometimes they don't understand that this work happens through collective energy and effort. We the people, in order to form a more perfect union. And so if I can leave you with anything, in 1967, my father published a book called Where Do We Go From Here? It's a book that most people didn't read, but it's one of the most powerful books, if not the most powerful books that he had published. Where do we go from here? Chaos or community? And hidden in the pages of that book, I believe in the chapter Where We Go From Here, he talked about the power of organizing. We talked about that today, Come on, y'all, we got to organize the people. We got to get the people together. There's something he said about organizing that people missed. He said, as we move forward, the compelling task is to discover how, actually he said the nettlesome task. That means it's irksome, it's burdensome, it may be difficult, challenging, but the nettlesome task is to discover how to organize, not our passions, but organize our strengths into compelling power. I want you to think about that in the days ahead. You go back to your cities, your states, your territories. Think about that word, or that phrase, organizing our strengths. Because oftentimes when we pull it together, we don't think about, one, a strategy and what is needed in the strategy. What are the strengths that are needed, and where do those strengths lie? What organizations, what entities, what individuals bring that strength to the struggle? And when you look at that together and begin to organize around those strengths, he said, as we organize these, discover how to organize these strengths into compelling powers, so that the government, he said at the time, would not elude our demands. I often say the power structure will not elude our demands. So it's going to take that kind of organizing today. And I often say, let's not just organize our strengths, but in that, let's begin to coordinate our efforts. That's why it's called the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. That's why SCLC was full of affiliates. That's why Daddy understood, okay, in this strategy, what's needed in this moment is this versus this. Because we all have a concern about an issue, but do we have the real strategies to address those issues? We can learn a lot from many of the unions, the 1199 and SEIU, and how they strategize. We learn a lot and extract a lot from what unions have done and continue to do. And so that's going to be key to going forward, because everything that I see, they're collaborating, they're connecting, but they're not organizing their strengths into compelling power. They're not necessarily coordinating the efforts, because everything that was done then, methodology-wise, may not be effective today. That's why the strategy is necessary. And then you determine who is needed to be at the table to bring whatever strength we need to attack whatever issue we need to attack. And so for me, that's where my head is going forward. As we work together, we get all these ideas, because we all got a bunch of ideas about what needs to be done, how we can move together, blah, blah, blah. But I keep saying, why is it that we are only making incremental changes and not monumental changes? So that's key. And then secondly, I'm going to leave you with this. It's somewhat of a selfish plug, but it's an important plug. In 1964, my father delivered a lecture in Oslo at the university there when he received the Nobel Peace Prize. And at that time, he said, I suggest that the philosophy and strategy of nonviolence immediately become a subject of study and serious experimentation in every field of human conflict, by no means excluding relations between nations. Most people slept on that. Fast forward 59, more than that, that was 64. So that would take us to, but 58. 58 years later, which would have been 22. The King Center inaugurated a platform where people can go to now to really study nonviolence. It's one thing to hear about it and think you know about it. It's another thing to really study nonviolence and then apply it so that you fully understand it, because there are a lot of misconceptions about what it is. Most of us also think it only applies in social justice movements, but it applies in your workplace, it applies in your home. If we can transform our homes, if we can transform our workplaces, we can also transform our society, but something has to transform inside of each of us. What Martin Luther King did was to leave us a foundation and a means for social change. So no matter what the issue is, if we don't figure out how to approach it out of that nonviolent foundation, we're gonna be hitting our heads up against walls and going around the mountain over and over again. So the breakthrough is gonna come when we understand what he said and begin to do it. So I'm just gonna challenge those of you who are here and the others that know and those that are online, go to thekingcenter.org, because I'm on a mission to continue what he did by getting people enlisted in a nonviolent army. That's what he was talking about, what he's doing in the area of health. We're only gonna break through if we have an full understanding of what nonviolence is. We study it and we employ it in every field of human conflict and relations. And that means in even these social justice spaces. So that's my selfish plug. That's what I'm leading for everybody, because if we don't study it, I'm telling you, I'm gonna come back to me 5 years later and somebody's gonna see me out and say, Bernice, you remember when you said this? I now get it. Don't be a latecomer. Join the movement now. God bless you.
And let's close it out in prayer.
It's very interesting that tonight I sat there and I heard everybody talk about me. And I said, why are they talking about me? The reason I say that they're talking about me is because when you look at the word up over there, KAIROS, there are two words to tell time in the Greek, chronos and KAIROS. Chronos means that there's 60 seconds in a minute, so many minutes in an hour, so many hours in a day. And we will meet chronologically. But there's another word called KAIROS, meaning that there are no minutes, no hours, no time. It is divinely inspired by something greater. Tonight we heard from George Gresham, we heard from Dr. King, we heard from what Michael and the Atlas group are doing. And I listened. I led the students here in 1963. John Lewis, I was 20, John was 18, and I'm 82 years old right now. Been in the movement 62 years. This is my 16th year. I'm speaking tomorrow, but I wrote a t-shirt, the only t-shirt in the world that's gonna say this on it. If I can, you can. If I can stand it for 60 years, you can stand it for 60 minutes. You can stand it for 6 months. And we've got to let our young people know that it was not easy. I was student government president in 63 in Nashville when we came. C.T. Vivian was 34, Andy Young was 28, John Lewis was 20, and I was 18. And all of those, and I heard them talk about us tonight and what we were doing. And two words that kept us strong. And one of them I heard someone say, we were willing to sacrifice and risk. If you're not willing to sacrifice, you're not ready to go on. Right. So we've been then sitting tonight in the bookends. We started with Vashti McKenzie, and we ended with Dr. King. And we've had the opportunity, not in a chronos moment, but in a KAIROS moment. Now let me tell you why most people miss KAIROS moments, because they're chronologically addicted. Yeah. People run out, I've got to be here. You don't have to be anywhere. When you're in a KAIROS moment, you stop and let God speak to you and let you move ahead. This was a KAIROS moment. This lady spilled out something that none of us probably have ever heard. The feelings, the hate, the overcoming, the power to move to the next level. And this is why I say now, I don't ever want the song to be sang to me, I'm on the battlefield. I don't need any more people on the battlefield with me anymore. I need some people in the battle. All right. There's a difference between in the battle and on. I know people have been on the battlefield, but they've never been in the battle. Not a scratch, not a heartache,
but they'll claim it. Stop being that. On the battlefield tonight, we have been in solutions to get in the battle and stay in the battle. Thank you, Michael Blake. Thank you so much. And we always started in prayer and we ended in prayer. But remember this, if I can, wait, I didn't hear you. If I can, if I can, if I can stay there for 60 years, you can stay there for 60 minutes. Eternal and almighty divine righteous God, giver of every good, perfect, and excellent gift. We start off by breathing out. Bishop asked us to breathe out and breathe out. I want us now to breathe in. Breathe in everything that we've heard. Make this moment a special moment. Make this a transformative moment in your life. Almighty divine righteous God, touch each person here where they needed to be touched. Each word, each utterance of something inside of them. Right now, God, we ask that you would continue to bless and anoint the King's Center and all of the work that it continues to do, continues to reach out, continues to go beyond just the Black community, but an international community. God, we thank you for the work that's being done tomorrow and all those that will be speaking. God, right now, I ask a special prayer. Join with me in prayer. Join with me in prayer for Fonnie Willis. I did hear you. Fonnie Willis, a Black woman who's standing her ground with 19 those being indicted. We've got to lift up prayer. We heard Dr. King say, we've got to be a coordinated, organizing force in this city and in this country. So tonight, as we leave this place, let us leave with a new anointing, a new feeling that this is a KAIROS moment to make a difference in our lives. And when we do, we can walk and see somebody in the CVS, in the Kroger, maybe say in the Safeway store, wherever we are. We can walk up to that young person and tell them this, if I can, you can. In the name of all the great prophets we pray. Amen. If I can, you can. If I can, you can.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great night. Have a great weekend.
Pardon me.
If you have a car in the garage, they close the garage at 10.